Every day, this elderly woman was harassed by a group of mischievous kids. They mocked her, belittled her, and even snatched her groceries. But today, they crossed the line, and something truly unexpected happened. Watch until the end to see how a small act of kindness changed her life forever. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In a small apartment on the outskirts of New York City, an old woman slowly opened her eyes. The morning light filtered through the tiny window, casting a soft glow over the room. She sighed deeply, sat at the edge of her bed, and stared at the quiet space around her. It had been years since her husband passed away. Her 3 children had long moved to different cities, caught up in their own lives and families. No one visited. No one called to check on her. Her days passed in silence, eating breakfast alone, watching TV with the volume low, and stepping out for groceries when necessary. But there was one thing that made her days even harder. A group of kids in the neighborhood often bullied her. At first, it was just harmless teasing. Then they started mocking the way she walked, slow and unsteady. Eventually, they became bolder, throwing small rocks at her from a distance. Every time she stepped outside, they were there. And today, they went too far. As she made her way to the bus stop, they were already waiting. This time, they weren't just laughing at her. They were after her groceries. "Hey, Granny, that bag looks heavy. Need some help? Or maybe I should just take it off your hands." One of the boys smirked as the others burst into laughter. Before she could respond, one of them yanked her shopping bag, sending her groceries tumbling onto the sidewalk. An apple rolled onto the street. A can of soup clattered into the gutter. The old woman froze, startled but not angry. With trembling hands, she bent down to retrieve her scattered belongings. But the kids weren't done. They kicked at her groceries, stepping on a loaf of bread, laughing as she struggled. One boy picked up a carton of milk and held it high. "Want it back, Granny?" "Oops, my bad. You're too slow." He laughed before tossing it to the ground, spilling the milk everywhere. The old woman stopped. Her hands trembled, not out of fear, but from deep sadness. And then a firm, commanding voice cut through the laughter. "Enough!" Everyone turned. A man stood there, his eyes locked onto the group of kids. His presence was undeniable, strong, steady, and filled with authority. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was cold, making the boys shift uncomfortably. One of them tried to act casual. "Relax, mister. We were just joking." But the man didn't smile. His jaw tightened as he stepped forward. Without another word, he crouched down, picking up the woman's groceries one by one. He wiped off the dirty can of soup and gently placed it back into the bag. "Are you all right, ma'am?" His voice softened as he looked at her. The old woman nodded weakly, her hands still shaking. Her eyes welled up, not just from the incident, but from the kindness she hadn't felt in so long. The kids stood frozen, unsure what to do. No one had ever stood up for the old woman before. People usually just walked past, pretending not to see. The man turned to them, his voice now calm but piercing. "If this were your mother, would you stand by and let someone treat her like this?" Silence. The boys exchanged uneasy glances. One of them looked down, nudging a small rock with his shoe. Then, one by one, they walked away. As they disappeared around the corner, the man turned back to the woman. His gaze was warm now, filled with genuine concern. "Let me carry this for you, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment, then offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, son." Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with gratitude. Without another word, the man took her bag and walked beside her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As they walked, the old woman stole a few glances at him. There was something comforting about his presence, like she wasn't alone anymore. After a while, she finally spoke. "What's your name, son?" The man smiled. "David, ma'am. I just moved into the apartment next door." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, so you're my new neighbor?" David nodded. "Yes. And I hope from now on I'm not just your neighbor, but family." The old woman stopped in her tracks. She looked at him as if making sure she had heard correctly. Such simple words. Yet to her they meant everything. For years she had hoped her children would come visit, that they would call, ask how she was. She had waited for a message that never came. But today a stranger had treated her like his own mother. When they reached her apartment, David carried the groceries inside, carefully placing everything in its proper place, just like a son helping his mother at home. Before leaving, he turned and smiled. "If you ever need anything, ma'am, I'm right next door. Don't hesitate to knock." She stood there, silent for a moment. A tightness formed in her chest, a deep, overwhelming gratitude she couldn't put into words. Finally, she smiled, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Thank you, son." Days passed and something beautiful happened. David wasn't just a neighbor. He started visiting every morning, bringing warm meals, sharing stories, even taking her for walks in the park. For the first time in years, she laughed. She didn't feel lonely anymore. And then one day her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. One she had been waiting for. She hesitated, then answered. "Mom, we're really busy. We won't be able to visit often, okay?" That was all they said. No questions about her health, no plans to meet. Once, that would have broken her heart, but today she just smiled. She wasn't waiting for their calls anymore. Because now, right next door, there was someone who treated her like family. Someone who showed her that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, the kind that asks for nothing in return. And that morning, when David arrived with fresh pastries for breakfast, she greeted him with a smile, one filled with warmth, gratitude, and newfound happiness. That's when she realized she wasn't alone anymore. And from this story we learn, never take for granted those who love and care for you. Life has a way of coming full circle, and sometimes the most genuine kindness comes from the most unexpected places. Because family isn't just about blood. It's about who truly cares.